The jungle was never quiet. Even at night, when the gunfire stopped and the shouting faded, the trees whispered, the insects hummed, and the heavy air felt alive. It was the one place where a Marine could stand still and still feel watched. And on one of those heavy nights in 1943, a small team of U.S. Marines gathered around something they never expected to see so close, something they had only heard ripping through the jungle during ambushes. A captured Japanese Type 99 light machine gun. But the moment they touched it, really looked at it, every man in that circle understood something important. This gun was not what they thought it was. Earlier that day, they were fighting for their lives on a muddy ridge on Bougainville. The Japanese had hit them hard, strangely accurate for men firing from deep inside thick foliage. Marines swore the burst came from ghosts in the trees. They almost couldn't believe how those bullets curved through the jungle and found them. But now the truth was sitting right in front of them, muddy, dented, and still warm from battle. The Type 99. And within minutes, they would realize why it scared them far more now than it ever did on the battlefield. It started that afternoon. Rain hammered the ground, heavy drops exploding in the mud. The air smelled like wet leaves, smoke, and a metallic taste of fear. Marines from the 3rd Division were pushing up a narrow trail when the jungle suddenly erupted. A burst of gunfire cut through the noise, sharp, fast, perfectly controlled. "Type 99, someone yelled. But what shocked them wasn't just the burst. It was how close the rounds landed. One Marine later said it felt like the gunner could see around corners. The Japanese gunner had dug himself deep under a fallen tree, completely invisible. The only sign of him was the smoke punching out a crack in the trunk and the terrifying way his rounds stitched across the trail. Marines dove for cover, some sliding face first into the mud. The air filled with splinters as the gun sliced branches like it was cutting cloth. They couldn't see the gunner, but he could clearly see them. The fight lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes of bursts that felt laser-guided. 11 minutes of Marines yelling, scattering, returning fire, and trying to flank an enemy they couldn't see. The gunner didn't miss often, and that's what scared them. Finally, a grenade rolled under the fallen tree. The explosion shook the ground and the firing stopped. The Marines approached with caution, rifles raised. Smoke drifted from a hole, and the smell of burnt wood filled the air. Inside the shattered log, they found the Japanese soldier and the Type 99 lying beside him. One Marine picked it up and stared. This ain't a piece of junk. No way. Another shook his head. How was he so accurate, man? He had us pinned like we were standing in the open. Nobody answered. But later that night, they were going to find out. Back at their temporary position, the Marines placed the Type 99 on an ammo crate. Rain still pattered on their helmets. Their clothes were soaked, their nerves fried, but every one of them felt strangely drawn to that gun. A corporal named Don Harrigan was the first to speak. "Look at this, look how open the sights are." He picked up the gun and aimed it at a tree 50 yards away. Even in the dim light, he noticed something strange. The iron sights weren't cramped like many LMGs. They were wider, cleaner, clearer. You didn't have to fight the weapon to line up your shot. Another Marine leaned in. Even with wet hands, it feels steady. The squad's machine gunner, Private Michael Ortiz, was usually quiet, but even he spoke up. "Let me see." When he held the gun, his eyebrows lifted, then tightened. "This thing balances weird, but not bad weird, good weird." Every Marine looked at him. "It wants to stay still," Ortiz explained. "Like, you barely have to try." He adjusted his hand position. Surprise again. And look at the grip. It's small, almost delicate. But when you aim, it locks into your shoulder real smooth. That guy could have fired from inside brush thicker than my leg and still hit us. A silence settled over them. They weren't looking at a relic anymore. They were looking at the reason why so many patrols had been caught off guard. Why Japanese ambushes felt impossibly accurate. Why Marines had died without ever seeing the enemy. The Type 99 wasn't just a weapon. It was a jungle weapon. And it was built for exactly the kind of fighting the Marines feared most. Hours later, a sergeant approached and crouched beside them. "All right, boys," he said, tapping the gun with a finger, Anyone know how this thing actually works? Ortiz shrugged. Only what we've been told. It's lighter than our bar, fires slower, but, brother, it hits hard. The sergeant nodded. Stronger round, too. 7.7 millimeter. Packs a punch. He pointed to the barrel. And you see this? Quick change. The Japanese can swap it in seconds. Means they can keep firing even when it overheats. One Marine swallowed. So that's why he kept hammering at us. The sergeant didn't respond right away. He wanted the silence to sit there. Then he said quietly, that man knew exactly what he was doing. And this gun made him twice as dangerous. He handed Ortiz a small, round object. Check this out, too. It was a muzzle attachment. Simple, steel, unassuming. The Japanese sometimes use this to focus their shots, the sergeant explained. Cuts the flash. Makes it harder to find them. Every Marine felt a chill. They remembered the fight. They remembered how they couldn't spot the gunner, even when he was tearing apart the jungle around them. And the best part, the sergeant continued, almost whispering, this thing doesn't jam much in humidity. Every gun we bring here gets moody, but this one runs clean. Nobody said a word. Finally, Harrigan muttered, so he had every advantage. Ortiz nodded slowly. Yup, and he knew it. Later, as darkness swallowed the camp, the Marines decided to test the Type 99, not to fire it. They didn't have the spare ammo, but to see how it handled, how it aimed, what made it feel so controlled. Ortiz lay down behind it, braced the bipod, and took a deep breath. All right, now watch. He pretended to track movement through the trees. Even without bullets, his motion told the story. The recoil direction, he murmured. It goes back, not sideways. The Japanese designed this to stay steady. He shifted the barrel left, then right. And look how easy it is to swing. Light front end. That means you can snap onto a target fast. Harrigan leaned over him. Man, our bar feels like swinging a car axle compared to that. Ortiz smiled sadly. No wonder he got us so pinned. Another Marine, Johnson, sat down with a sigh. Guys, how many of our boys got hit by one of these without ever even seeing the shooter? Ortiz didn't answer. Nobody did. The unit fell silent, listening to the rain. Some stared at the gun. Others kept their eyes on the trees, as if expecting another burst from the darkness. But the sergeant broke the silence. This is why we fight smart, not just hard. Enemy builds something good. We study it. We learn from it. And tomorrow we use that knowledge. He looked around at each Marine. That is why you bring weapons back instead of smashing them in anger. He paused, then said something that stuck with him for the rest of the campaign. A gun doesn't make a monster. A man does. Just before midnight, one Marine named Colin spoke, almost himself. You ever think about the guy who was firing this? What he was thinking? Nobody wanted to admit it, but yes, they had thought about him. A young man, far from home. Another soldier thrown into a nightmare jungle, fighting for reasons he might not even understand. A man holding the same gun with the same shaking hands, fearing the same death. War made enemies, but sometimes war also made mirrors. Ortiz whispered softly. He was good, real good. You respect that no matter what side you're on. For a moment, the jungle felt still. The night wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere far away, a bird cried out. Then the sergeant pointed to the Type 99 again. We'll report everything in the morning. Command will want to know how accurate this thing really is. And we're going to tell them straight. He stood. Get some rest, boys. Tomorrow, we put this puzzle together. As the Marines settled into their foxholes, the Type 99 sat alone on the crate, rain dripping off its receiver. It looked silent, harmless, almost forgotten. But none of the Marines forgot how it sounded on that ridge, how close those bullets came, and how someone, hidden deep in the jungle, fired it with frightening precision. They didn't know it yet, but tomorrow, when they broke the gun open, studied its parts, and really dug into its design, they were going to find something inside it that left them truly speechless. Something that explained everything. Something that would change how they saw the entire Pacific War. The sun hadn't even cracked over the treetops when the Marines gathered again around the captured Type 99. The jungle was gray, wet, and steaming from the night's rain. A thick mist rolled along the ground, turning the world into a shadowy maze. You couldn't see far, but you could hear everything. Bird calls, dripping leaves, the slow footsteps of men who had barely slept. Ortiz wiped the condensation from the machine gun's receiver with the sleeve of his uniform. He wasn't smiling. None of them were. They knew today wasn't about curiosity anymore. Today was about understanding. Understanding why this weapon had nearly wiped them out. Why they had been pinned by an enemy they couldn't even spot. Why a single Japanese gunner felt like he was controlling the entire ridge. The sergeant crouched beside them and nodded. All right, let's open this thing up. The Marines formed a tight circle, like students around a teacher. Except this lesson was soaked in mud, blood, and survival instinct. Ortiz, being a machine gunner, took point. He cracked open the receiver, pulled back the bolt assembly, and carefully slid the internal parts into his lap. The moment he saw inside, he froze. What in the... Harrigan leaned closer. Dude, are you kidding me? Ortiz shook his head. His fingers traced the polished metal, the clean lines, the almost delicate smoothness. This thing is beautiful, he whispered. A few Marines exchanged looks, confused, surprised, almost offended. Was he really calling an enemy gun beautiful? But then they saw it too. The internal parts didn't look like they came from a jungle. They didn't look like they had been dragged through mud and rain. They didn't even look like they had been fired in the last 24 hours. It was as if the inside of the Type 99 had been protected by some invisible shield. No rust, Ortiz muttered. None. Look at this bolt. It's slick like it's been oiled 10 minutes ago. That's impossible, one Marine said. Our guns start sweating after 5 minutes out here. Not this one, Ortiz replied. This thing breathes jungle air better than we do. The sergeant reached in and lifted the bolt, turning it in his hands. You see this? He asked quietly. Japanese steel. Hard stuff. Stronger than what most people think. He slid the bolt back toward Ortiz. And the machining? Clean. Too clean. A gun like this stays reliable even when everything around it falls apart. A cold reality began to settle on the group. The jungle hadn't beaten this gun. And the jungle never would. Ortiz continued inspecting the parts, and suddenly his thumb stopped on something unusual. A spring. The return spring, tight, almost unnaturally strong. He pressed it gently, then pressed harder. Then he frowned deeply. Okay, now this is interesting. What? Harrigan asked. Ortiz held up the spring. This thing's perfect. No wear. No soft spots. No discoloration from heat. He held it up to the light, letting the gray morning glow through the metal coils. Guys, this thing cycles smoothly even when it's hot. That's why that guy kept laying down fire on us. His gun wasn't choking. One Marine groaned softly. You're telling me our bar jams when it sneezes, but this thing can run through a rainstorm? Ortiz nodded. Pretty much. Another Marine kicked the dirt. No wonder he pinned us. The sergeant exhaled slowly. We always assumed Japanese weapons were simple, outdated, rough. But this is efficiency. Harrigan looked up from the gun, eyes hard. So all that accuracy wasn't luck. Not even close, Ortiz replied. This thing feels engineered for jungle fighting. He slid the recoil assembly aside and picked up the barrel. The moment he did, he stopped again. Oh boy. The barrel felt heavier than it looked. Thick walls, dense steel, built to handle high pressure, built to stay straight. He peered down the bore, and the Marine saw his expression change. His mouth tightened, his eyes widened slightly. Guys, you might want to see this. They huddled closer. What is it? Ortiz set the barrel down and tapped it. This rifling is sharp, sharp like a new blade. This thing stabilizes rounds better than most rifles. He paused. And it's chrome-lined. The sergeant's eyes widened. Oh, hell, chrome? Seriously. Yep, Ortiz said. See that shine? That's chrome. Keeps the bore clean. Stops rust. Makes every bullet spin almost perfectly. One Marine spoke softly. So, that's why he never missed. Ortiz nodded. He wasn't fighting us with a junk gun. He was fighting us with a precision machine. Silence. Deep, heavy silence. A silence that acknowledged something they hadn't wanted to admit. The enemy wasn't just brave. He was skilled. He was well-equipped. And he was dangerous in ways they didn't fully understand until now. The sergeant broke the silence. Let's look at the sighting system. They all leaned forward as he examined the sights closely, adjusting them with careful hands. He squinted down the line of the barrel. Then he let out a breath. So that's the trick. What? Harrigan asked. These sights, they're simple, but they're open, wide, clean. They let in more light. The Marine studied the sight. It wasn't cluttered. It wasn't tight. And most importantly, your eye didn't have to fight it. You can aim fast, the sergeant said, and your view stays wide, so you can track movement even as you shoot. He tapped the rear sight, and this dial range adjustment. He could set this to the exact distance he wanted. Ortiz nodded. This gun is tailor-made for short, sudden bursts. The jungle's perfect for it. At that moment, the Marines weren't looking at the Type 99 like a captured enemy gun anymore. They were looking at it like a mystery solved, a dangerous mystery. But the part that changed everything came next. The magazine. The Japanese soldier had carried several, but only one survived the blast. It lay in the mud next to the crate, dented but intact. Ortiz picked it up. All right, let's check this thing out. He flipped it over, and every Marine felt a chill. There, scratched into the metal, were 3 small Japanese characters, carved deep, slow, purposeful, like a signature. Harrigan swallowed. What does it say? The sergeant stared at it for a long moment. Then he answered quietly. It's his family name. A hush settled. Even the jungle seemed to pause. The Japanese gunner had carved his own name into the magazine. The same magazine he used to fire at them. The same magazine he had loaded and reloaded in fear. The same magazine that had traveled across an ocean with him. This wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a final message from a man they never knew. A reminder that behind every enemy position, behind every burst of gunfire, behind every ambush, there was a human being, a soldier, a son. Harrigan rubbed the back of his neck, visibly shaken. It kind of makes you think, he whispered. He wasn't that different from us. Ortiz set the magazine down gently, almost respectfully. No, he said softly. He wasn't. For the first time since the battle, the Marine's anger faded. What replaced it wasn't sympathy. Not quite. It was understanding. They weren't just fighting machines. They were fighting men who believed, feared, and fought just as they did. The sergeant cleared his throat and motioned toward the parts. All right, back to work, he said. But his voice wasn't as firm as before. We need to finish documenting everything. They reassembled the guns slowly, carefully, each part sliding back into place. The Type 99 clicked together with an almost satisfying precision. When it was whole again, it didn't look threatening. It looked calm, like a silent animal waiting to be woken up. Ortiz tested the action one last time. Smooth, he murmured. Too smooth. The sergeant nodded. So here's the deal. We take everything we've learned, and we report to command. They need to know what this thing can do. They need to understand why Japanese fire feels so accurate. And they need to know this gun isn't just some relic. He paused. This weapon changes how we move through the jungle. A rustling sound echoed from somewhere deep in the trees. Instinctively, every Marine grabbed their rifle. The noise faded, then came back louder. Leaves shook, branches snapped. Someone whispered, "What the hell is that?" The Marines froze. Ortiz slowly lowered the Type 99, and the sergeant whispered, "Stay sharp, eyes open. Something's moving." The jungle grew silent again. Too silent. The sergeant took a slow step forward, scanning the trees. Whatever was out there, It wasn't one of them. And then a single gunshot echoed far away. Not theirs. Not American. A Japanese rifle. The Marines exchanged looks. Cold ones. Harrigan swallowed. You think they're coming back? The sergeant tightened his grip on his weapon. Let's hope not, he muttered. But if they are... He glanced at the Type 99 sitting on the crate. They're going to want their gun back. The air grew thick. Heavy. Unpredictable. Something was coming. And the Marines could feel it in their bones. What they didn't know yet was that the next 24 hours would push them into one of the most terrifying jungle encounters of their entire campaign. And the Type 99 they studied so carefully today would become the centerpiece of a fight they never saw coming. Night came down fast. The jungle didn't dim slowly the way forests back home did. Here, the daylight seemed to snap off like a switch, leaving the world smothered in darkness. The trees faded into black pillars. The air turned heavy, thick, almost suffocating. Every sound felt closer. Every shadow seemed alive. The Marines sat in a tight perimeter, rifles resting across their knees, listening, waiting. Nobody said out loud, but every man felt the same cold truth. They weren't alone. Somewhere out there, just beyond the trees, something was moving, watching, testing the edges of their nerves. The earlier distant gunshot hadn't been random, and it hadn't been friendly. Harrigan sat next to Ortiz, hugging his rifle like a lifeline. You think they're tracking us? He whispered. Ortiz didn't answer right away. He stared into jungle, eyes sharp but uncertain. Maybe, he finally said. Or maybe they're trying to figure out what happened to the guy we took this gun from. He nodded toward the Type 99, lying against a tree stump, barrel pointed down. Even in the dim light, the gun looked awake, like it still had something to say. The sergeant moved to the center of the circle. Listen up, he whispered. Nobody fires unless you got a clean shot. They're good at slipping around the trees. If they're here, they're testing us, feeling the perimeter. A branch snapped somewhere in the dark. Every Marine tensed. The sergeant lowered his voice even more. Eyes up, no talking. The jungle fell silent. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Minutes crawled past, slow, painful, each one a battle against imagination. Then a faint rustle. To their right. Then another. Left side. Then another. Behind them. The sounds weren't loud. They weren't rushed. They were careful. Intentional. The Marines weren't hearing animals. They were hearing men. Men trained to move without being seen. Harrigan's fingers trembled slightly on his trigger. I don't like this, he mouthed. His voice barely reached Ortiz. I don't either, Ortiz murmured back. The sergeant raised a hand for silence. Then he leaned his head toward the trees. Something shifted out there. Just a flicker. A shape brushing between two ferns. Then another lower crouched. Then nothing. The jungle swallowed them again. The sergeant exhaled slowly. They're scouting us, he whispered. Trying to count how many we got. Harrigan whispered. Should we show them? No, the sergeant replied. They're waiting for us to panic. Ortiz looked at the Type 99 again, then leaned close to the sergeant. Maybe that's what they're here for. You mean the gun? The sergeant asked. Ortiz nodded. They know he grabbed it. They want it back. This thing probably belongs to their squad. Maybe it's their only LMG. The sergeant stared at the gun for several seconds. Then something changed in his expression. A realization. A strategy. He knelt beside the Type 99, lifted it gently and checked the chamber. Then he turned to Ortiz. You know how to fire one of these? Ortiz hesitated. I think so. From what we studied today, yeah. The sergeant nodded. Then get ready. Harrigan's eyes widened. Wait, are you going to use their own gun on them? Ortiz swallowed. That's the idea. Harrigan gestured wildly at the darkness. They'll hear it and think. That one of their men is shooting, the sergeant finished. Exactly. The plan was bold, dumb, brilliant, dangerous, all at once. Ortiz adjusted his grip on the Type 99. It felt different now, not like a captured weapon, not like a puzzle, but like a warning waiting to speak. The Marines quietly shifted positions, controlling angles, closing gaps. If the Japanese soldiers attacked, they'd funnel themselves into a trap, but the jungle stayed quiet. Too quiet. Then a faint voice echoed in the distance. Japanese. Short. Harsh. A command. Another reply followed. Softer. Then silence again. The sergeant whispered. They're talking to each other, getting into position. Ortiz adjusted the bipod legs. On your call, Sarge. The sergeant raised a hand, then slowly curled his fingers into a fist. Now, Ortiz fired. The Type 99 erupted with a sound none of the Marines had ever heard before. Not the sharp bark of an American rifle, not the deep thump of a bar. This was different. A fast, steady, almost silky stream of fire. It sliced through the jungle, echoing between the trees like rolling thunder. The Marines held their breath. Then, a voice shouted in confusion. Another voice yelled back, panicked. Bushes thrashed. Footsteps scattered. Somewhere to their left, a man shouted something desperate, almost like a warning to his own comrades. The sergeant leaned toward Ortiz. Keep going. Slow bursts. Ortiz fired again. Short, precise bursts. He remembered everything he had studied earlier that day. The light recoil, the smooth cycling, the wide sights. He aimed into the dark where he knew the Japanese soldiers would hear him best. Then, a Japanese rifle cracked back. Another, then another. They weren't shooting at the Marines. They were shooting at the ghost of their own gun. Chaos erupted across the tree line. Voices shouted in confusion. Somewhere, someone fell and cried out. Another voice screamed a command. The Marines exchanged shocked looks. It's working, Harrigan whispered. Holy hell, it's actually working. But then the jungle responded. A burst of machine gun fire tore through the trees from the far left. Not the Type 99. A different Japanese gun. Faster. Higher pitched. Then rifle shots answered. The Japanese squad had realized there were Americans firing their weapon, and they weren't confused anymore. They're coming, one Marine shouted. The sergeant raised his rifle. Hold the line. Figures burst in the shadows, fast, determined, low to the ground. Shadows with rifles. Shadows with bayonets. Shadows with fury. The Marines opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit the night like lightning. Bullets cracked through leaves. The jungle roared with overlapping fire from both sides. Ortiz kept firing the Type 99, sweeping across the left flank. Its accuracy was shocking. Even in darkness, the gun held steady, letting him push the enemy back step by step. For a moment, it felt like the gun wasn't fighting against them anymore. It was fighting with them. But the Japanese were fearless. They charged again, emerging from the undergrowth in short, silent bursts. Right side, a Marine yelled. Harrigan spun and fired until his rifle clicked empty. Another Marine grunted, falling back after a shot grazed his shoulder. The sergeant pushed forward. Firing burst into the advancing shapes. Don't let them flank us. Ortiz swept the Type 99 again. His pulse pounded in his ears. Sweat dripped down his face. The gun grew hotter, but it didn't jam, didn't slow, didn't complain. It just fired, over and over. Then suddenly, silence. The last few shadows slipped back into the trees. A single pair of footsteps pounded deeper into the dark, fading into nothing. And then the jungle fell completely quiet. No gunfire, no shouting, no movement. Just a deep, heavy breathing of tired men who had survived something they didn't fully understand. The sergeant scanned the tree line, rifle raised. Then finally, slowly, he lowered it. It's over, he whispered. Harrigan dropped onto a crate, chest heaving. That was insane. Ortiz gently set the Type 99 on the ground. Its barrel steamed softly in the night air. Even after all that, it still looked ready. The sergeant sat beside Ortiz and stared at the gun. You know, he said quietly, if we didn't study this thing today, we wouldn't have made it through that. Ortiz nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. The sergeant continued. That gun wasn't just accurate. It wasn't just reliable. It gave us enough confusion to turn the fight, Harrigan added, and enough fire to get us out alive. Ortiz looked at the Japanese characters carved into magazine. He traced them gently with his thumb. He fought with this, he said softly. And tonight we did too. The sergeant nodded. War is strange like that. The jungle, slowly regaining its sounds, seemed to hum with agreement. The sky brightened slightly as dawn approached. The leaves glistened with dew, and a thin mist rolled across the ground. The Marines gathered their gear and prepared to move out. Before they left, Ortiz knelt beside the Type 99 one last time. He didn't take it as a trophy. He didn't take it as loot. He took it because he understood it now. The man behind it, the precision inside it, the danger it carried, and the strange, unexpected way it saved their lives. As he slung it over his shoulder, Harrigan smirked. "You keeping that thing?" Ortiz shrugged. "We studied it. We survived because of it. Might as well report properly." The sergeant gave a firm nod. "Let's move." As they walked deeper into the glowing dawn, one truth lingered in Ortiz's mind. A weapon doesn't choose sides. It only reflects the hands that hold it. But understanding your enemy's weapon sometimes means understanding your enemy. And sometimes that knowledge is a thin line between life and death. Thank you so much for watching this documentary-style story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts about what part hit you the hardest. Your support helps more than you know. See you in the next video.